I'll start with Reggie's story, and it wasn't too long ago at the Greenbrier training camp. I think there was 10 of us, assistant coaches and players that had been with the organization 10 years straight, and we had a little dinner one night, and I kind of did the same thing. To the best of my memory, kind of recalled how each individual coach or player, at least how I perceived that story to be, how they arrived or became a part of the organization. So, starting with Reggie back in 2006, it was our first draft. Generally speaking, when you get hired as a new coach and you come in and you're working, Mickey and I, closely with the scouts, I'm going to say probably, 2 months, 3 months, and you're looking at the roster closely. And look, we held the second pick of the draft in most of the rounds that year. So we spent a lot of time, and we would always have this, what I would say we'd always have, later to be known, we'd always have this, good day meeting with Mr. B and Mrs. B, but go through with Mr. B, these first round selection candidates to keep him abreast as to. We'd watch some film, some cut-ups. He'd have great questions. We'd have a printout of all the players. And I recall that year, this was my first draft with the organization, of going through a number of talented players and kind of covering them all. And that was back then in 06, it was a 2-day draft. So I think we went rounds 1, 2, and 3. In fact, I know we did 1 through 3, broke that evening, and then we would come back with 4, 5, 6, 7. And so as we were leaving the facility, the draft was the next morning, we were having what's become now our annual night before dinner before the draft. And we get there, Mickey, myself, and the other guys that are in charge of pro or college personnel, the evaluation experts, and discuss several things. And so on my way to that first dinner, I had received a call, pretty good information. And back then we weren't, BlackBerry and you were kind of hip. That was it, So I had a Razor flip phone, and man, out of nowhere, I get this information that the Houston Texans are going to pass on Reggie Bush. And two things went through my mind. A, I was ecstatic, and then B, I thought, man, I don't know that we covered Reggie with Mr. B, because we were expecting Houston to take Reggie. And so right away it was like, holy cow, we'll get him up to speed. So I'm one to always take advantage of an opportunity. And so we got there to the restaurant, and it was important, I felt like, to kind of have this poker face. And prior to going to the restroom, I just said to the group, I got this feeling that we're going to have an opportunity to draft Reggie Bush. Anyone want some of that bet? And this is the type of bet Loomis likes, where he knows the answer. He knows he's already won, right? So had 5 bets for $20 a man. I went to the restroom. I came back, and there were 420s sitting at my place. And word had broke about that opportunity. And so the next day there was, look, and I say this with respect to every player that we signed and drafted that year, to include Drew Brees, Scott Vegeta, Marques Colston. But we were kind of in that stage in the hiring process with coaches, celebrating each little small victory. We'd get a coach to come, and we'd ring a bell and put a circle around his name, and he's in, because there were so many other challenges. And so all of a sudden here we have a chance to really select probably one of the most, if not the most dynamic college football player that our country has seen prior to social media, because it was still text and emails. And a Heisman Trophy winner, national champion. And I remember getting in that morning, and look, we had a meeting with Mr. Benson and brought him up to speed. And then, there were a few guys talking about, well, what can we get for this draft pick? And Mickey and I were like, man, we're not trading this pick. So here it came time for that selection, and many of you in this room were here. I would say on a 10 Richter scale, the selection of Reggie Bush was a 9-9 for this organization. If you have a clear memory, You remember the crawfish boil across the street. You remember season tickets being sold out within 2 hours, and they have been ever since. That selection, that's pretty dynamic. This was Elvis Presley or Michael Jackson or the Beatles. Seriously, that's how big it was. And so, look, I came here as a new young head coach with a number of rules that Parcells instilled upon me. And, you know, he talked about, man, that first pick of the draft, make sure you fly him in commercial with the rest of the draft class. That first pick of the draft, don't have a separate dinner or hotel suite or limousine awaiting for him. And so here we are after the first 3 rounds. There's a little rain on the ground. The Zurich was in town, and we are heading. Peter King was in the car. Of course, he was doing a feature story, and we were heading to Emerald's in a limousine. Reggie had just arrived private and then was going to be staying at the Lowe's penthouse suite. And I thought, I've broken like every rule in the book regarding this first pick, and I've only been here 2 months. I mean, Bill's not going to talk to me. We walked into the restaurant. It was still damp, and as soon as the doors opened, there was just a chant, and it was this started slow, Reggie, 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 and then we worked our way back to the back left section, if you're familiar with Emerald's, and I would say seating approximately 30 people, and we were at one round table, 12 people, and I sat. Reggie was to my left, and he turned to me and said, "Coach, you did this all for me?" And I just looked at him. I said, there's some serious de-recruitment that's going to have to take place with this guy. I mean, he was just, as young as he looks now, he was that young. And anyway, and then it proved, and there's an old smart evaluator that once told me, when you win a championship, every single transaction that takes place leading up to that championship becomes validated immediately relative to what your goal is. Your goal is to win a championship. In that playoff run, the Arizona game, 2 things happened in that game. I was ecstatic for how he played. I mean, he had over 250 all-purpose yards, and yet I remember him carrying out the baseball bat that was like our secret and thinking, holy cow, there's going to be questions about that. But an amazingly dynamic player, an amazing teammate, a guy that was obviously a huge part of what we build here just from the very foundation of getting started. And it was the first, like, man, ring the bell, ring it 3 times. It was a big deal for our city to have that opportunity to select Reggie Bush, and then to see the success he had with us. Just a dynamic punt returner, a very good running back, a very good receiver, and here we are winning a Super Bowl championship. And you look back and look, one by one, we're going to hit this draft class, right? Streif was here last year. He was in that draft class. One by one, all of those guys that were selected became, and you don't realize it at the time, they became so necessary to achieve what we wanted to achieve. And so they were the pillars essentially of what we were going to build. And there were a lot of things that went in our direction, good fortune sometimes. But that story, as I'm telling it, I think is pretty accurate. Pete, I'm just going to, CJ, there's a few guys back there that, you know, at some point we're going to get a little blurry with our stories, and at least it's on paper now. So it's with great honor on behalf of the Bensons, it's on behalf of Dennis Lauscha and our organization that Reggie Bush is entered into the Saints Hall of Fame. Congratulations.